Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video on my channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing a boot comparison between the Nike Mercurial Vapor 15 Elite and the Nike Mercurial Vapor 16 Elite. One, the Vapor 15 Elite, is the outgoing model, while the other, the Vapor 16 Elite, is the current model. And I want to give you guys a sense of how the two boots are different in terms of their actual tech and features, as well as how they feel and fit on feet. Now, full disclosure, I actually haven't worn my Vapor 16s yet because, as you guys may have heard from my previous videos, I'm still recovering from a knee injury and a hamstring injury. It's been taking some time due to some, operational setbacks. So the impressions I might give on feet especially may not be the most accurate to when the boots are fully broken in, but I will do my best to give you guys a sense of how they feel compared to my fully broken in Vapor 15s. I'm going to go through the different tech specs, starting with the upper, the heel area, and the sole plate, and then I'm going to show you guys what it's like on feet, and I'll finally end the video with some extra tidbits of information that might be relevant to helping you guys make the choice of whether you prefer the Vapor 15 or the Vapor 16. And with that all being said, let's get right into this comparison. So starting with the uppers, we're going to begin by looking at the Vapor 15. The Vapor 15 features a synthetic upper, specifically called Vaporposit Plus, an upgrade over what you got from the Vapor 14, which was the original Vaporposit. Vaporposit Plus consists of 5 layers of textile mesh that are kind of heat pressed together to give you a super thin synthetic upper. Now the upper itself is by nature very stiff, but not stiff in the sense that it's super restrictive or anything, but it's just stiffer given the nature of synthetics in general. It definitely softens up over time, but it still has a more restrictive and more, what's the right word? I guess I could say firm sensation to the upper, just because of that synthetic nature, the more plasticky sensation you get from the materials used, and as such, this makes for a generally more responsive upper than most, as with the synthetic nature, you don't have certain parts of the upper that are stretching more in some areas than others, like you would get with a knit, for example. The whole upper moves with the foot when you are actually wearing the boots. The upper spans the entire boot, but you will really notice it when you come to the front of the boot, not really so much in the heel because you have the internal plastic heel counter, which we'll talk about when we get to the heel section. But in terms of the actual touch on the ball, because it's a very thin plastic synthetic, you get a very plasticky touch on the ball, but it's also very raw and pingy, more so visceral because of how little is between you and the actual ball. And for players who really like to, connect with the ball and really like to feel the ball when you're striking it, this kind of upper is very nice. In terms of grip on the ball, despite the kind of, patterns you see coming through the entire upper, and you can kind of hear it maybe. I don't know if my mic will pick it up, but it has more of a rough and coarse texture to it. This doesn't really offer any kind of grip at all on the ball. The ball still feels super smooth to the touch when you're using a Vapor 15, and for people who've never used boots with grip elements before, this will feel very natural and very, well, not unique, but very forthcoming to them. It's something that they should be very used to, and will make dribbling a pretty nice and easy experience. Running through the center of the upper, though, you get a fly knit tongue. You can see that this fly knit tongue is very thick, pretty non-porous, which should help in terms of the comfort section, but also in terms of adding a little bit of extra, insulation and protection from things like the elements or, cold air and etc., etc. Moving to the Vapor 16, things are a bit different. With the Vapor 16, Nike decided to abandon their whole synthetic idea that they went back to for the Vapor 14 and with the Vapor 15, opting to do an entirely knit upper this time. The main piece of knit that you'll be finding on the Vapor 16 will be grip knit, which is a completely different thing to kind of see on the Mercurial Vapor because of the fact that it adds grip to the Mercurial Vapor, something that's never really been on the Vapor. They've tried to do it through the Vapor 11 predominantly by having speed ribs across the top, but those didn't really provide much grip per se. They're more so just an added texture element. But this, if you've had the Phantom GX1 or the Phantom GX2 or Luna 2, you will know that grip knit is incredibly tacky in terms of its actual constitution because of its silicone coated fibers, and that provides a lot of grip to the ball. So when you're actually dribbling, the ball will get stuck to the upper. Well, not stuck, but it has a lot more friction against the ball with the upper, and as such, that creates more grip. It can lead to a bit of a learning curve because as you're dribbling, you might, kind of stumble over the ball or trip over the ball, or maybe find yourself, going for a skill move and the move not coming off correctly because you're not used to the grip. but in terms of the actual grip itself, it's not that hard to overcome. And once you get used to it, it's a pretty rewarding experience, especially when you're trying to trap the ball out of the air, for example, or trying to do something like an elastico where you want the ball to basically stick to your foot. Um, the next pieces of knit that they really use are just kind of fly knit and derivatives. Running through the center, you have a fly knit collar or fly knit tongue, and you can see that with this fly knit, it's a lot thinner and it's a lot more porous. I guess Nike did this to save weight, but this means you'll be a lot more exposed to the elements, especially cold air and rain. Although with grip knit, this is waterproof, so I don't know. You'll feel like more comforted from the outside, but throughout the center where the fly knit is, it might be of a bit of a uncomfortable experience in more adverse weather. But that the last piece of knit that they've used is something called Atom knit. Now, for those of you that don't know, Atom knit is really just fly knit that's been engineered to be lighter, but still retaining the same structural properties of a good knit wrap or a good knit upper. So you're going to get the same amount of reinforcement and structure running through the Atom knit here. And just so you guys know, grip knit and Atom knit kind of like start and end where this seam is. So the Atom knit starts down here where the safari print is on this specific electric colorway, and the grip knit's over here and it ends where that seam comes. But essentially, you're going to get the same structure and responsiveness that you wanted from fly knit, especially the more structured uppers back in the day. For example, think of like Vapor 12, Superfly 6, which had one of the most structured fly knit uppers ever. That's kind of like what this area feels like to me, but you're still going to get a lighter feeling overall from that kind of fly knit because of the way that Atom knit is constructed. As such, the Vapor 16 upper is a 3-layer knit construction, which makes it a bit lighter, but also a bit more accommodating for wide feet because of the fact that knit stretches in certain areas. As you know, I mentioned that with the Vapor 15, this upper doesn't feel like it stretches like in certain areas more than others when you move because of the more restrictive nature of the synthetic. Whereas with the Vapor 16, the fly knit, as you guys know, with like a sock or something like that, it just moves, more freely because of how elastic what's the right word? The fibers are. So either way, both uppers are definitely very solid packages. I haven't tried this one out yet, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm very interested to see how it will perform. If it's anything like Vapor 13 or Vapor or Superfly 7, for example, this will be one of the best uppers ever made. And in terms of the touch on the ball, this is very thin in barefoot. This is also very thin in barefoot because it's a 3-layer construction, which is even thinner than what's on this. So in all things considered, you're getting a very nice upper package, whether you go for the Vapor 15 or the Vapor 16. Moving to the heel, you can see that with this Mercurial Vapor 15 that we're going to start with, you get an internal plastic heel counter, which you can kind of see where the lip is over here. This is where it ends. So it's going to be resting on like your Achilles tendon a little bit. And depending on the way your ankle is shaped, you might find that a bit uncomfortable or a bit displeasing. For me, I never had any issues with heel discomfort or blisters or anything with this Mercurial because you get a well sculpted heel area. And also you get these nice little, I don't know what kind of foam they are, but they are foam pods with a microfiber suede, which, gives you the right amount of cushion, but also the right amount of lock-in so that, your ankle is not really sliding around in the boots, but you're also not feeling too, compressed and too overwhelmed with any bulky heel pods. So it's a very nice and sophisticated heel package. Additionally, you get a very nice tongue tab and you get a very nice heel tab, which makes putting the boots on pretty easy without any difficulty. And you can see that the opening of the Vapor 15 is relatively wide, and it's something that, depending on your ankle shape, won't be a problem. But for me, as you'll notice in the on-feet portion, it does create a bit of a dead space issue for me because of the way that my ankles are shaped. Either way, though, it still makes putting the boots on very easy and is one of the benefits of actually choosing the Vapor over the Superfly, whether you go for the Vapor 15 or the Vapor 16. The only main difference that you get from the Vapor 16 would be in terms of that actual heel counter. You can't see it as well on this boot because of the way that the upper is textured back here. But what they did with the Vapor 16 is that they put that U-shaped cutout that you got from the Phantom GX1, the Phantom GX2, the Phantom Luna 1 and 2, as well as the Tampa Legend 10 into this Vapor. This Vapor 15 does not have that because it was released before all of those boots. But being released afterwards, Nike decided to implement that U-shaped cutout. And what it does is it basically relieves pressure on the Achilles tendon because there's nothing actually there apart from just the cloth and the the microfiber suede liner that you find in the back. Again, you get those heel pods, those foam pods that run all the way around, which give you the same kind of sculpted feel in the Mercurial Vapor 16 that you got from the Vapor 15, but without that extra, insert here where, the heel counter would be. So me personally, it doesn't really make a difference because I've never had issues with discomfort in the heel. But if you're someone who has struggled with that, or maybe blisters, then the Vapor 16 might be a boot for you in terms of both vapors because you're getting that removed part, which relieves that pressure. Either way, though, both heel areas are more or less the same. And apart from the opening being slightly smaller on this, which kind of reduces the dead space that I personally get, there isn't really much that's, different about the heel area of the two boots. If you had one, you'll pretty much know what it's like to have the other, and both are relatively enjoyable experiences. As a side note though, I did forget to mention that with the Vapor 16, there was an issue with the original launch colorway, so the prototype, where you were having a really wide ankle area over here due to the way that it was shaped by Nike. Apparently they rectified that with the Safari colorway, this electric colorway, as well as the Shadow Pack and the Mad Ambition, although I have heard some people say that the Shadow Pack one is also suffering from that same issue in the heel. Me personally, I do get some bunching up of the material on this side when I tie the laces tight, so I don't know if it's completely been fixed, but for me, it's not that big of a deal. If it's anything for what it is right now, I think it's fine. So if this is fixed compared to what was on the original prototype, then I don't know how good that prototype heel area was, but I'm just glad to know that Nike has, tried to make some improvements to the heel overall, given that they had that issue with the prototype colorway and potentially the Shadow Pack colorway as well. Now we're going to look at probably the most important or most modified part of the Mercurial moving from generation to generation, which would be the outsole. This outsole is very different compared to what you got from the predecessor Vapor 14, as right now we're looking at the Mercurial Vapor 15 outsole. With the Vapor 14 and I think the previous 3 outsoles before that, you got a nylon chassis, which was supposed to be supporting an anatomical kind of sole plate that was inside the boot, which would mold to your foot the more that you wore it. But what Nike did with that is that they completely eradicated that and put an air zoom unit inside of the chassis. Now, the reason for this air zoom unit was to increase comfort as well as responsiveness through their, well-renowned air zoom technology, as expected. They also completely reworked the stud pattern, as you guys would remember. I think from Mercurial Vapor 11 and Superfly 5 up to Superfly 8 Vapor 14, you got chevron bladed studs throughout the entire outsole, in the heel, in the forefoot, in the midfoot, and for support studs. You also got a bit of a stiffener bar running from running through here for the 14, so the previous generation. But Nike decided to completely abolish all of that and go for these more rectangular and tri-star shaped studs that you see throughout this outsole. And the reason for that was that they wanted to increase the effective speed in all directions. Most people know Mercurial is kind of a speed boot. Straight line speed is what they think of when they look at the stud pattern of previous Mercurials. So Nike wanted to get away from that and move to something that was more, useful and agile in multiple directions, hence their tri-star design. I'm going to focus on the air zoom unit first. So basically the air zoom unit was articulated, meaning that in certain parts of the foot that you would normally move, like your big toe, for example, it was kind of sectioned off from the rest of the foot to make sure that when you step on that part of the foot, you get more cushion in that area, providing you with a more responsive feel depending on the movements that you're making in game. In theory, it's a very useful idea, but in practice, it kind of limited the effectiveness of the air zoom unit because, as you guys can see from this stud pattern, there is a lot of dead space between the actual studs here. And what that does is that when the boot is being worn and someone is stepping, you're getting more pressure points and more activation of the zoom unit in these areas where the studs are, but not in these other areas where the studs aren't to the same degree. And as such, you get a more lopsided feel and energy return or cushion effect from the air zoom unit. Most people experience this as feeling stud pressure, especially on these two studs here in the lateral and medial sides, because there just wasn't enough happening from these two central studs or these two forefoot studs to really give you that maximum pressure, unless you were sprinting. And even when sprinting, you would more so feel it here and here, but not really through the middle. So that was a big issue that Nike had to figure out with their air zoom unit. And then in terms of the actual stud pattern, it's definitely lacking on the aggressive side, but as a plus, honestly, I'd say that it's more effective for use on artificial grass. And the reason for that is that this rounded off nature of the studs, as you guys can see, mine are more worn out. But even when brand new, the studs are just a lot more, rounded off compared to the typical chevrons and blades that you would get from, those previous Mercurial stud patterns, which means that on turf or artificial grass, you'd be able to twist and pivot, obviously not as freely as like with a dedicated AG Mercurial or with a boot that has, conical studs, but it was definitely a lot easier and a lot more forgiving than the previous chevron bladed stud pattern that you got on older Mercurials. So, it was kind of a trade-off of, I guess, aggressiveness and, purist like vibes for more of a utilitarian and more reliable boot, I'd say. Moving to the Vapor 16, Nike attempted to fix these issues in numerous ways. So beginning with the air zoom unit, you still get that same nylon chassis that houses the air zoom unit, but as you can see, they've kind of done something different with the window. It's a lot more open as compared to this, which had that kind of like weird zigzag pattern. This is a lot more straightforward and open, and the big reason for that is so that they could accommodate these 4-foot fins. Now these 4-foot fins add like an extra bit of stud to the actual sole plate, and they also work in two ways. One, in terms of activation of the actual air zoom unit, as well as actual traction. So in terms of the air zoom unit and activation, what happens is that you have a lot more surface area because you have these 7 fins, which get slightly taller and taller as they move down across the foot. What this does is that it creates more surface area for the player when they're stepping, so that the air zoom unit pushes up even more and activates even more, instead of just in those, select areas where the studs are the longest or the tallest. Additionally, Nike completely got rid of the articulation factor of their air zoom unit. So where, your big toe would be separated by a little line or break for articulation from the rest of your foot, for example, that's gone. The air zoom unit is just one piece. So now you're getting more surface area for more activation from the air zoom unit's sole plate or stud pattern, and then you're getting less articulation, which means that the whole airbag is being activated by all the studs at the same time, thus theoretically producing more energy return and more of a more responsive feel. Hopefully this works out in practice. I don't know if this is going to be that effective because, again, I haven't actually played in the boots, but it's very promising what Nike decided to do with this, especially because a lot of people were complaining that the air zoom unit wasn't, what it was cracked up to be, and just provide more of like a weird bouncy sensation with stud pressure on the lateral and medial sides of their feet. And then moving to the stud pattern, you can see that Nike kept the rectangular studs in the heel, but they added in their chevrons back to the 4-foot. And, with these extra blades that you get as the 4-foot fins, it just increases the overall aggression that you get from the Mercurial stud pattern, which makes the boots, more, I guess I could say, closer to their roots in terms of aggression and straight line speed. Unfortunately, though, they sacrifice, the utility that you got from the Vapor 15 stud pattern, because with this, you're just going to get stuck in the ground a lot more easily. You're going to have a lot more bite and traction, but that means on artificial grass, it's just going to be easier to grip in, and you're going to feel it a lot more on your joints, especially in your knee, your ankle, or your hip, which could, increase your risk of injury. That said, I'm still going to play with these on that kind of surface, but it's just something to be aware of. So I guess the best way to compare the two outsoles would be to say this is more utilitarian, while this is more, mercurial and back to its nature. Both are definitely very solid packages, though, and I especially can't wait to see how this truly compares to this after, breaking them in fully. On feet, the two boots feel relatively similar to one another. Nike didn't really do too much when changing the shaping compared from the Vapor 15 to the Vapor 16. You still get a relatively wide 4-foot for a speed boot and a relatively wide midfoot for a speed foot. Now, all things considered, my Vapor 15 is fully broken in, my Vapor 16 is not broken in at all. So this has about the same feel of width as this non-broken in Vapor 16, which is very good and very, promising for people with wider feet, because if you have wider feet, you can easily fit into this straight out of the box and not get any hot spots or pressure points like I'm getting right now. Now, in terms of the actual heel areas, like I mentioned before, both boots feel exactly the same. But if I kind of like stand like this, you guys can see here, tons of dead space. Easily I can put my finger down through there. Here, not so much. Nothing I can really do about that. And that's what I meant by the opening being narrower. I just have a less awkward fit in the Vapor 16 than in the Vapor 15. But either way, like, That's just like more of a cosmetic thing because the heel still does a very good job of locking me in. And like I mentioned before, if you've had one boot, you'll know what the heel feels like in the other one. Even with the U-shaped cutout that I'm getting from the Vapor 16, it doesn't feel any different from the Vapor 15 in terms of actual comfort and any pressure points on my heel. Both feel pretty nice and pretty well accommodating. Although I am still getting that bunching up of the material here on the side, and also if I go like that, right here, like I mentioned earlier. So it is a bit of a like annoying occurrence with these boots, but it's not the end of the world. Could be worse. And then in terms of like the actual like main difference, you're gonna notice it's gonna be the outsole in terms of the actual air zoom unit. When I stand like this and go like that, I can feel the entire air zoom unit moving under me with the Vapor 16, whereas with this, the Vapor 15, I can only really feel it on those my toes and on the lateral studs. I'm getting like this kind of gaping hole between in that space between the lateral studs and the actual medial studs. And you also get a bit of like a squeaking sound too. I don't know how well you guys can notice it, but I can definitely hear it when I'm kind of calf raising right now with both boots. But the squeaking is more so on the Vapor 15 than on the Vapor 16. So, I mean, it's not really a big deal. It's not something that you're really going to notice too much, especially when you're in the heat of a well run like soccer game or football match. It's not really that big of a deal. The silhouettes of the boots are very nice. I mean, especially in this pink colorway, I think the Vapor 15 is the better looking of the two. But this Safari colorway is also iconic, and it looks very good on this Vapor 16. Outsoles, as you guys can see, this is the Vapor 16. This is the Vapor 15. I don't know how well it's showing on camera, but both look pretty good. And the only real other thing I really want to mention is when I'm trying to twist and pivot with the Vapor 16, I can feel my foot getting stuck and like snagging even on this fake turf mat, whereas with the Vapor 15, it's not as bad. It's a lot more free and easy to move. And even when I'm doing that, I can also feel the upper moving more with my foot, whereas with this, I can just feel a little more flexible and less structure. Just harking back to that part in the upper where I talked about the Vapor 15 having the more structured upper than the Vapor 16. But either way, both boots are very solid, very fantastic packages. I would definitely recommend either or, and you're not really going to go wrong if you choose one over the other. With that said, let's get back into this comparison. There are a few more things I just want to mention about these two boots before I really give you guys my recommendations of what boot would be the best for you. But, just starting out, I want to talk about ACC. I didn't mention it in the upper part, but you can see here that on the Vapor 15, there's ACC, all conditions control, whereas on the Vapor 16, it's nowhere to be found. It just says GripKnit. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, GripKnit is waterproof. So you don't really need ACC anymore because you get that kind of porosity reduced by the GripKnit, but also you get the same kind of grip effect and traction effect from ACC with the GripKnit in general due to the tackier constitution of the silicone coated yarns compared to this, which is just smoother because of the way that it's constructed. And honestly, when playing in the rain, this doesn't grip the ball that well, but from other GripKnit boots that I've worn, such as my Phantom GX Elite DF, that has a lot more grip in the rain. So if it came down to it, if I wanted more grip in all conditions, I'd probably choose the GripKnit upper from the Vapor 16 over the Vapor 15. But again, it's a personal preference, especially if you care to have ACC on your boots versus not. The other thing I want to talk about is durability. And the reason why I didn't really go into it is because, again, I've only used this boot fully. This has not been worn yet. So I can't really give you guys an accurate sense of the durability from the Vapor 16. But based off of the Vapor 15, this has incredible durability. I've used these for about a year and a little bit now. And as you guys can see, there's no real sole separation anywhere. I do have some turf stains. And you can see I've got some creasing, a little bit of dirt, and the insole's a bit worn out now. But apart from some color fade and stuff like that, everything else is intact. No tears on the upper, no sole separation. All studs are intact. Air zoom unit works fine. Fly knit's not tearing or separating anywhere. So it does indicate that the Vapor 16 is a very durable boot. And granted, I do have a lot of boots, so I have a much vaster rotation and thus don't have to use my Vapor 15s as often. But given that I've used them so much, as they're one of my favorite boots in my rotation, they've held up very well, especially compared to something like my Puma Ultra Ultimates, which only lasted for 4 months of really consistent use. I imagine that with the build quality of this should probably hold up similarly in terms of, quality control. But because of the knit nature of this upper, as well as the fact that it's not coated by any silicone like top layer, because of the silicone coating in its actual like upper, while this is, a silicone coated actual, top layer over the mesh, and this is also synthetic, which is more durable than knit. You can only imagine that this may not be as durable long term as the Vapor 15, but I don't know. It remains to be seen. The next thing I really want to talk about are the prices. So given that the Vapor 16 is the current model, you're going to be seeing the same prices more or less that you got from the original Vapor 15, like, back in the day. So with normal colorways of the Vapor 16, you'll be looking at about $340 Canadian. And also keep in mind, I'll be listing all the prices in Canadian because I am from Canada, and I'm not really like in tune with all the American prices I've had, but I will put them up on the screen just so you guys can, have a little bit of a reference, especially because the US dollar is used a lot more commonly for most countries. So anyways, that tangent aside, normal colorways of the Vapor 16 will run you about 340, while, the more special colorways, for example, like this electric colorway, which was 360 Canadian, will start at about 360 and move upwards depending on the colorway and how limited it is. Same with the Superfly. The Superfly 10 will start at about 375, whereas any special colorways of the Superfly will go to about 385 plus, depending on the colorway and, other, interesting factors. Whereas with the Vapor 15, you get a lot more volatility in terms of price, being the outgoing model. So in terms of retailers, I've seen them going for about $239.99 to $259.99 for the Vapor, and for the Superfly, $274.99 to about $304.99. And it's all dependent on like certain things like the colorway, how old it is, like the graphics. Like for example, this is the first graphics pack that was used on the Mercurial with the swoosh on the side, the air zoom kind of like flash here. You got the big air branding on the instep. These colorways came out between 2022 and 2023, like the middle part of 2023. So they're going to be a lot rarer because, they're older. They're about a year older than the new graphics where you have the swoosh across the top and you have the air branding on the sides. But I imagine these will be cheaper from retailers just because they're so old. So they might want to get rid of their stock versus the other ones, which may be a bit more expensive due to them being, on the newer side. Additionally, certain colorways, for example, the MDS colorways that come with a premium will be closer to the higher price points that I mentioned, just because, again, they usually came with a premium, so they're supposed to be more expensive anyways. Now, looking at resale, I usually look at GOAT, StockX, and eBay for buying my boots from resale. And looking at the Vapor, depending on the colorway, again, it's pretty volatile. You're looking at about 200 to 800 for most of the regular release colorways and some special edition colorways. And by special edition, I'm talking about like things like the MDS or like an Mbappe signature colorway. I'm not talking about the super limited colorways. So like, for example, the Rashford Superfly 9s, the Mbappe Superfly 9 from the World Cup, or, like the 25th anniversary Mercurial Vapor 15 and Mercurial Superfly 9 in that all silver with the iridescent colorway accents and stuff, or the United Pack LE. I'll put up pictures of all of them so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But all of those are very vast in price and definitely over $1,000 easily, especially if you're looking at GOAT or StockX, where people tend to price the boots a lot higher. So, if you're on a budget, the Vapor 15 is definitely more accessible, although not necessarily, depending on the colorway you're looking for, what size you're looking for, and, especially if you can only get the colorway in a certain like model, like the Vapor or the Superfly, it can definitely make things a lot more confusing, a lot more complicated when you're trying to procure a pair of Vapors from, resale. So if you can, I definitely recommend, trying to buy them off retailers if you can find like this right size. But if not, just be aware that these are very volatile in terms of price on the resale market. So now that we've thoroughly compared the boots, which boot would be the right one for you? That's a personal choice, of course, but I'm going to give you guys my overall recommendations for each boot, and I'm going to list these also at the end of the video on like a kind of chart, so you guys can, reference that in terms of the choice you want to make. But I just want to help you guys stay completely informed with what you need to know for which boot is right for you. So starting with the Vapor 15, this is the boot I would recommend if you prefer synthetic boots or synthetic vapors, kind of like the Vapor 11 or Vapor 12. No, not 12. Vapor 11, Vapor 10, my bad. If you like something that has a more structured upper and doesn't have any texturing to the upper, or if you dislike grip elements, for example, if you want a less aggressive and more versatile stud pattern, and if you have narrow to semi-wide feet, and lastly, if you are on a budget. Now, I'd recommend Vapor 16 on the other hand, if you do prefer knit boots or knit vapors like the Vapor 12 or the Vapor 13, if you prefer a freer, softer, more flexible upper with texturing or grip elements, integrated into the upper, if you want something with a more aggressive stud pattern or stud layout, and if you have much wider feet and are not on a budget. Overall, those are my main recommendations for the boots. And like I said, I will put this up on a table afterwards so you guys can, have that information to reference. But that's just my overall recommendations for the boots. Personally, I haven't gone to try these out yet, so I can't really make that decision yet. But the Vapor 15 is a very tough bargain or tough boot to beat, in my opinion, because this is arguably my favorite vapor or favorite Mercurial actually that I've worn, because I don't have that many vapors, but I do have a lot of Superflies, and they're more or less the same. So this is my favorite Mercurial that I've owned so far. So if this can beat this, then well done. But we'll see what happens when I get to actually using them and trying them out. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, drop a comment, let me know if you have either of the boots or if you have both and what you think of both boots. If you have any different experiences or opinions about the different tech features and different ways that the boots may fit and feel on feet, relative to yourself. And let me know what your recommendations for other buyers would be. And also if you have any other interesting things you want to see or would like to hear, then drop a comment putting those things as well. And of course, don't forget to click that subscribe button. It really shows me that you guys care about this content, you're enjoying what I'm putting out, and you would like to see more. And it also helps with the algorithm in terms of, helping me to expand my reach to other viewers who may be interested in my kind of content. And with that all being said, thank you all so much once again. I will see you all in the next video.